All right, so I have Jason Graves with me, and I'm so excited to speak with you finally. I feel like I've been following you online for a long time and really excited to finally get a chance to chat with you and ask you some questions. And I know that the Video Game Music Academy community has been really excited to hear from you because every time I do like an informal poll about who inspires them or who their favorite composer is, your name comes up a lot. So first of all, thank you so much for spending some time with us here, Jason. And everyone loves you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'm a big fan of like the shotgun approach for music. I mean, it's so many games. I think the market's sort of saturated. You can't really turn left or right in a game story. At least my daughters say so without bumping into something. Daddy, look, you did that. Daddy, you did that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, that to that point, your work is extremely versatile in terms of all of the different sounds and approaches and like sort of like tonal landscapes you have to kind of approach. How do you get a grasp on all of those different, all of those different worlds you have to kind of step into and make music for? Because that's, to me, I feel like that would take a lot of time for like research or like an extremely like large breadth of experience, with all those different types of sounds to know what to pull in and what not to pull in to those different worlds. How do you like wrap your head around that?
It's probably the blessing and the curse that I was kind of, I mean, I won't say born with because I wasn't doing music all my life. I wasn't, like playing Mozart sonatas at the age of 3 or anything. But I definitely, like even in middle school, it was handbells and drums, and then in piano, and then in high school it was percussion and guitars and bass guitar, and then in college it was all this world music stuff, ethnic winds and ethnic percussion and lots of classical orchestral percussion and things like that, but more guitars and basses and ukulele and stuff like that. So it kind of just kept getting bigger and bigger. What I loved playing, and I discovered when I was in Los Angeles and I was still in school, I had an agent that was also my boss's agent, and so the agent had me put a demo reel together of the stuff that I was the most proud of. So I was picking all these different things, and half of them were from school, projects I'd worked on at school. The other half was from stuff that I'd worked on as a working composer in Los Angeles. And the agent said, like, this is the most horrible demo reel I've ever seen. And I was like, oh my gosh, oh no, like I was really proud of this. It had like a big kind of Stargate orchestral fanfare, and then this real like weird direct TV like crunchy Marilyn Manson kind of thing. This was the mid-90s, so bear with me. But it had all these different kinds of tracks, right? And her point was, there's no single linear thread here. Like, I have no idea how to sell you as a composer. Do you write orchestral music, or do you do like drums and bass with distorted guitar, or do you do like funk stuff with like a band? And I was like, yeah, I do. I do all of those things. Why can't we make that like a marketable thing? She's like, no, you need to have a niche. You need to have like a sound that you're known for. And I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you, because I just like doing, don't make me pick. Like, I love all of them. So that's why games has been so great. I kind of bend, the instruments to my will depending on the needs for the score. So what I love doing is like playing ukulele and accordion and guitar and writing all these kind of lyrical types of melodies, like Moss is a soundtrack that came out last year. That's what I would do if I were doing an album for myself, right? But, a game like Dead Space doesn't need music like Moss. It needs the crazy, messed up instruments and lots of weird orchestral textures, and it's always been about learning as well. I think that's why I like playing all these instruments, because every instrument is something new to learn, and I learned something new, kind of a way to approach the instrument, but also maybe a way to write music with that instrument. So it's all informing everything else, I think. That's the long answer to your very short question.
Yeah, no. So, well, it's a pretty long question, but the the thing that kind of stuck out about your background, you have a lot of history with percussion, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this will tie into like kind of my next question is like, what do you feel like is your unique strength, because you've got all those different areas? Like, is that versatility? Would you consider to be like your unique strength, or your unique kind of angle that makes you, potentially more successful than other people, or is it something else? Because the reason that percussion thing stuck out to me was because I was thinking of like those Dead Space type scores where you've got all those really unique and unusual textures and how you use the instruments, and I feel like that would kind of come up more in like an experimental percussion sort of situation.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of, and I think saying percussionist is probably a very polite, snooty way of putting it. I was basically a drummer before I did anything else. I played drums. That was my first thing. I mean, I guess I played piano and handbells like when I was in elementary school, but I was playing drums and drum set in middle school. And I really love the rhythm. I love the backbone. And I was listening to a lot of progressive rock. So you've got Yes and Rush and Genesis, all these crazy time signatures. And I really, really dug that. I thought that was super cool. And the funny thing is, all through college, and probably the first 10 years I was out of college, I always thought that being a drummer was my biggest deficiency. Because especially in school, like, I'm a drummer and I'm in music composition as a major, and the guy next to me that's doing the same thing is a sax player, so he's writing all these cool saxophone things. The guy over here is a piano player and he's doing all these amazing piano things. And then the person over there plays cello and she's recording herself doing all these different cello. I'm like, ding 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 ding, okay. Feeling very deficient, right? I don't know anything about the orchestra. I don't know anything about harmony or what a dominant 7 chord is or anything like that. And I tried to make up for that studying on my own after I got out of school, but it really wasn't until Dead Space that you mentioned that I started appreciating approaching everything from a drummer's perspective, even if I didn't realize I was doing it for the first 10 years. Because with Dead Space, they wanted something really scary, but they didn't want melody or harmony, or actually they just wanted something really scary. I told myself, well, I'm not going to do any melody and I'm not going to do any harmony. It's just going to be super abstract. And what did that leave me with? It left me with rhythm. So I was using time signatures, kind of the changing of the beat and varying it all the time as a melody almost, and as a gimmick to kind of put everybody, whoa, whatever this is, make them really apprehensive. And, so definitely that being a drummer, I think, is probably what identifies, at least to me, my music the most. And I'm actually doing a talk at GDC this coming year, about that very thing, about approaching music composition and implementation for games as from a drummer's perspective.
It's awesome. Actually, I can relate to some of that because I was a music education major in college and vocalist. So while I had the pitch stuff in theory, I was from a harmony perspective. I was a complete idiot in relation to my peers around me, and my I had the vocalist thing where rhythmically was not super strong, and just reading wise I wasn't super strong because it's such a you rely on your ear so much singing that my reading chops were super weak too. So I had to come at things I had to do a lot of work outside of the rehearsal room and come at things from a different angle. And it really felt like a weakness for a long time, but now I feel like it's more like a strength because now I have more of an ear and appreciation for lines and melody and that kind of stuff. So that's
exactly awesome. That's what's so great about anyone who wants to write music. All of their background, whether they consider it baggage or like the best experience of their life, it's all going to mold and shape their music kind of when they funnel it through, their process of writing. And it's really cool. I think it takes 5 to 10 years maybe for up and coming composers who really want to assert themselves. They want to find their sound and things like that. I think, at least for me, after about 5 or 10 years of mucking through all the examples that people give you and temp tracks and all that sort of stuff, I've finally kind of filtered out a lot of that and realized that, like you with singing and hearing those lines, for me it's rhythm.
Yeah. I find that always interesting when people really stress about wanting to find, like, actively pursue finding their sound.
Right.
And it's like, because it's like, your preferences are going to inform your decisions, when you're writing something. And whatever you listen to, whatever you like, whatever you don't like, they're going to inform those choices. And those, the series of choices are going to ultimately shape your sound. So it's like kind of funny to think about, like, actively trying to chase it. Like you're gonna go on some mystical journey, but really it's just like you got to work for a long time, and
Exactly.
it'll come out eventually, one way or the other. Cool. What do you think is like the weirdest influence? Just that I'm thinking right now. The thing I really musically cut my teeth on, uh, in all music, was Dave Matthews Band. I really was not listening to any music until I got hooked on Dave Matthews Band in high school, and that really, that was a very different kind of band to be listening to in the '90s than most other bands. And that, I think, really kind of shaped what I liked after that. What is, like, kind of like one of the most unique sort of things that you musically cut your teeth on that you feel like maybe other people would be surprised to hear about, that you really really resonated with you?
Like growing up, you mean, like in high school?
Yeah, exactly. Like what influenced you that most people maybe would be surprised by, or that's sort of kind of unique.
Well, I know as a drummer, I was playing a lot of progressive rock, but when I started getting kind of in my junior and senior year of high school, again, this is junior. This is like the late '80s. This isn't even the mid '90s, but New Age has just started kind of coming around, and there was this one label called American Gramophone, I think. Chip Davis, who's a drummer but also writes music, had a whole series of albums called Fresh Air, and he was actually one of the first record companies that he owned. He started it, that did digital recording, like in the late '70s. So it was this instrumental, like, Baroque, medieval, new agey synthesizers and live instruments, like, all kind of mashed together. I really loved the Fresh Air series. And then Ray Lynch is another guy that I discovered in high school that just, like, blew my mind with what he was doing with synthesizers and guitars and things. But all of that music is very, it's very lyrical and listenable, and even a little schmaltzy, you might think. But I still love all of that today, and that influenced a lot of the kind of experiments and songs that I did in college. I released two albums in college of, like 8 or 10 songs that I recorded on cassettes and had duplicated. I sold like 300 or 400 of them at different music stores locally and stuff like that. But it was very new age, very, minor and kind of saccharine sweet. And I was just learning, just figuring out my sound.
It's awesome. Hey, that's cool though. That's awesome. So to kind of continue with the wavelength of kind of unusual approaches, you've used some pretty unique ensembles in your recording. You've used, if I remember correctly, you've recorded like really low string ensembles, like with no violins, and
Right.
like a low men's choir, like that kind of stuff. And I feel like recording studio is a really expensive and risky time to experiment. So what did you, like, before you got to the studio? You can't just like be like, hey, I'll just go next door to the men's choir house. And like, how did you think of
Right.
using those types of ensembles, and how did you sort of know that was going to pay off?
So every project, usually with games, every game especially is very, very different. And the one you're talking about is The Order, which was such an incredible game, and I'm still so heartbroken that it got panned as poorly as it did. But that particular game, they wanted a lot of weight and a lot of, like, kind of burden of the characters. They can live for a really long time, but they're responsible for doing all this stuff, and they're basically leaving all their loved ones behind. So there was a lot of, like, serious implication behind everything. And the idea was Austin Wintory and I were sort of paired up in the beginning, kind of in the brewing thoughts, like let's come up with idea process, and we were sort of trying to one up each other, I think, a little bit, because I was over at his place in Los Angeles, and I was saying, I don't remember who said what. So one of us said, well, we should do a lot of low strings, like 12 or 18 cellos, and then like a bunch of violas. And the big thing that the developer wanted was they didn't want a typical kind of Hollywood expected sound for the game, just a giant big orchestra. They were looking for something a little more personal and a little more contextually based on their specific game. It's what the developers always say. Oh, within 5 seconds, I want the listener to know that it's from our game, which is,
yep.
5 seconds. I mean, that's like when they keep asking for that over and over and over again, after 20 years, you start really being like, well, I'm going to go way over there this time and try something completely different. So in this meeting, Austin and I together at his studio, I think one of us said, well, we should have lots of low strings, and no French horns. Like, what else are expected kinds of Hollywood sounds? And one of us said, no French horns at all. And the other one said, no brass at all. And we're like, sure, that'd be great. What about strings? Well, we should have lots of low ones. And then one of us said, like, no violins. And as we were carving out the orchestra, the sound kind of started coming together. And I sort of went from there and then, did the men's choir. It's all like sub basses and contra baritones, all these low men and low woodwinds, 12 of just what you'd normally have 2 guys in the orchestra playing these low. We had 12 of them all lined up. Just lots of low. And it was a matter of, at my computer, I would do mock-ups of what it would sound like. And everyone understood that it would just sound like that, but better. I personally wasn't worried about the sound, or if anyone would like the sound, or if we would be stuck with this recording bill and nothing to show for it. But apparently a lot of other people were, because once I was conducting the first piece, there were all these like high fives and everyone was going, yeah, up in the booth at Abbey Road, because they were unsure. Because it's a really weird ensemble, like 12 cellos and 24 violas and 10 basses, I think. Just all this low stuff. But it was all about how it was orchestrated and how you took those voices and kind of, this is, if your orchestra's this big, we're using these instruments. We just kind of had to go like that and take all those low guys and spread them out. But that's what's so much fun. I mean, I learned so much from doing that, even just on the stand live conducting and giving some additional instructions to get like a better balance for something. It's all about learning. That'll be my recurring quote that you can just put a little balloon up here. I learned so much.
That's awesome. And it never stops. It never stops.
Yeah, it does. It never stops.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was thinking of the I remember now you mentioned that you and Austin were kind of kicking around the same ideas. He did use like the really low woodwind ensemble for I think the Banner Saga or something. I don't remember exactly what, but I remember thinking, wow, that was an interesting idea. I wonder where. Now I know that's because you guys were kicking around just cutting people from the orchestra savagely.
Yeah.
Those poor union musicians. No, I'm kidding.
Oh well, we made up for it though. That was the thing. We had so many of like just. I mean, the great thing was, so woodwind players, for example. Okay, if you play contrabassoon, contrabass clarinet, that's the lowest, like literally the lowest instrument in the orchestra. Plays this super low B flat, even lower than the basses do, the string basses. So if you play contrabass clarinet, you also play every other clarinet. I mean, you've got, a little tiny, like, piccolo clarinet and an alto clarinet all the way down to the bottom. And just because your name's on the list with 6 or 7 or 8 other clarinet players, you're just assuming that it's this mixed family of clarinets. So all the clarinets are showing up at Abbey Road, like, walking, they're all holding their giant cases. And they were actually a little concerned that they had gotten confused because no one ever has 6 contrabass clarinets. Normally you have 1, not 6. And they were saying, no, wait a minute, are you sure that you had that? And I actually had to reassure them. It's like, no, you're all playing contra on this. And they were like, oh, so what's an interesting sound? Because they're all British. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
That's awesome. Oh man, I can't imagine that I mean, from an orchestration perspective, what do you feel like was the thing you had to be most careful about with dealing with all of those low sounds in order to kind of take those, like you're saying, take those voices and spread them out to kind of create more space and give them a little bit more room to move around from like a linear perspective, I guess. But what do you feel like was like the thing you had to be most careful of, just because everything was so low?
Well, mud. You had to make sure that it wasn't going to be too muddy. But honestly, I think good orchestration in general, the lower you get, the more simple things get. So if you're looking at kind of higher chords, there's all these notes up here, but when you start getting down low, everything just kind of starts turning into like octaves and maybe a fifth here and there.
Yeah.
So it was just about being careful and being aware that there was going to be a lot of power down there. And those 12 woodwinds normally were just doing octaves. It'd just be 6 on the bottom and 6 on the top. But when they came in and played, it was this. I mean, you can hear it when you listen to the score. It's just an amazing sound.
Yeah. It's a really cool sound. It's really cool when you've got someone in the car with you, and you've got a really good stereo in the car, and they're not expecting. First of all, you don't really expect you to just fire up some video game music in the car typically, but when you get something with that much power in the bottom, it's really a fun conversation piece. And it's really...
You preempt with, okay, first of all, let me just say I'm sorry, but I'm going to go ahead and play some music here that is not the most enjoyable to listen to, but it's going to blow your mind.
Yeah, no, I would just say nothing. I would say, and I would act like it's completely normal. It's just run-of-the-mill playlist in my car. Actually, that reminds me. One of my best friends and I used to have a game where we'd drive down the street in our college town in Delaware, and then we'd be in traffic, and we would find the most unusual music to be blasting, because most people would blast hip hop, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And we would blast the most unusual to blast music out the windows with our windows down. And the goal was to see who could go the longest without cracking a smile as people walked by and made comments at us. It was fun. I wish I had access to this back then. It would have been fun to just like have that bassy sound just pouring down slowly down the street.
Oh my gosh! Everyone's suddenly feeling like uncomfortable and not knowing why.
Yeah, why is the patio dinnerware and silverware rattling on the table all of a sudden? That'd have been fun. Oh well, next time I go to college, my next life. So I want to change gears a little bit here, because one of the questions I get the most is, how do I get those first gigs? How do I get my foothold? How do I get my foot in the door? And how do I make those first few connections? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you sort of got your initial foothold in the gaming scene specifically, and if you have any like specific advice for people who are trying to do the same thing.
Sure. Although so I've been doing this for 20 years now, and everyone, if you ask anyone advice about anything, their advice is actually based on their experience. It's a psychological sort of thing. So my advice is all based on kind of how I ended up finding work. And I think it's still relevant today, although there's just a lot more static out there everywhere. For example, in 1998, I was publishing a newsletter, like a single page, double-sided, that I folded up and mailed out to about 200 or 250 people here around North Carolina, where I live. And I'd been in LA for a couple of years, going to school and working, and I was just sort of letting everybody know that I was here and letting them know that I was available. And the bottom line is, if no one knows who you are, or they don't know that you're an option for music, then they're not even going to be able to hire you, even if they wanted to. They have to know your name, right? Mm-hmm. So making introductions and meeting people face-to-face is best if you can go to conventions, like local IDG, what is it? The International IGD VIGDVA. The local game conventions. We've got one coming up next Friday. It's been a long week. I'm sorry.
No, I actually I was like I feel like I know, but I don't want to jump in because now I'm psyched out that I'm gonna say it.
IGDV. Anyway,
yeah.
The inner and doing stuff like that is great. If there's anyone making games nearby, you know, hanging out with them, even if they don't need music or they have someone else doing music, that's always nice. If you're in like the UK, there's, you know, Develop in Brighton, and there's all kinds of actual music things also over in London. And then, of course, you've got GDC here and a bunch of other things. But the hardest part about doing all these things is, I think when I started doing it, I mean, literally, it was like, you know, Enon Zur, Jack Wall, Tom Salta, Chris Valesco, Chris and Sasha, Jesper Kidd. I mean, there were only like 9 or 10 of us total that were kind of palling around at these conventions. And most of the time, a lot of these games that were coming in back then kind of got parsed out to one of us. There was always, you know, maybe 3 people in the running, and it was always like, oh, it's Enon, Tom, and I, or no, it's Jesper and Jack and I, and then one of us would get it, the other 2 wouldn't, and then some other time, you know, the other person would get it, and the other guys wouldn't. But it was a very, very, very small community. And that's not exactly that way anymore. It feels that way to me, but, you know, GDC itself, I don't know what it's up to now. Something like, I mean, 40,000 people? A lot, where it was like 3,000 or 4,000, you know, back before it was even at San Francisco. It's really, really big. So that's what I mean by static. And obviously it's important to have an online presence and to be involved in all the social media and the community and to have music accessible by other people to be able to listen to your music. But you also don't want to, you know, barrage everybody. Hey, you know, sending an email out
Listen to my track.
Yeah. I mean, like, I love, who was it? There's someone that I had an email subscription to because I love their stuff, but they would send like 2 emails a day, just kind of saying the same thing different ways. I'm like, I already have everything you need. I don't need to know there's a sale, but that's great. Delete. And like 3 hours later, just in case you missed it. And I finally unsubscribed. You know, you don't want to be the person that makes them unsubscribe. You know, like, it's everything in moderation. And it's hard to quantify that, you know? Well, how do I know if I'm not being too obnoxious, but I don't want them to forget about me? And, you know, I think a lot of it's just feeling your way and doing what feels comfortable to you. And I think if you're sensitive to the fact that you don't want to annoy people, but you're anxious to work and you're welcoming to a 2-way relationship and you're looking to build foundations to help people's games be better, then that's the way that, at least, that I look into it. How it's just like Jerry Maguire, like, help me help you. How can I make your game even better than it is now? And to be really excited about that and learn more. If you were a developer and we were talking just about whatever, I wouldn't be talking about myself at all. I'd be asking you about, you know, where do you live and what do you do and how long have you worked on the game and tell me more about it. Now, you know, what kind of movies do you like and do you have any kids and all that personal stuff? Because if we're going to be making a game together, I want to be able to feel like I'm hanging out with you even when the camera's off and I'm over here working on stuff. I know you as a person. And then that works as a 2-way street. And then you know me as a person because we talk more about it. And hey, we're both on the East Coast and you're in Boston and I'm down here. And it's all personal. It's what it comes down to. Make those personal connections. And then the music and the opportunities will follow, assuming that people like you personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it makes sense too. And I mean, any working relationship is always better, you know, as long as you don't, like, things don't get too casual. But like you know, it's always better when you feel like you have a dialogue with someone where you know, like, and trust them, especially if something challenging comes up, because then you can, like, you know, you can give feedback and get feedback and no one's, like, getting their feelings hurt or trying to read into, especially, like, email feedback or, like, that kind of stuff.
Anything
yeah. It's like, oh, what's Jason saying? What does he mean by this? But if you and I have, like, had a lot of casual conversations, I probably know he probably just means what he wrote, and there's no hidden innuendo or anything like that. So Cool.
Yep.
You mentioned you said you have kids. You said
Yeah, yeah.
how many kids do you have? If you don't mind me asking. We
No,
have
that's
two
all I'm
over
going to
here.
say about the kid. No, yeah, no. I've got an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. They're both girls.
Okay, I've got two very young boys. I've got a 4-year-old and a 10-month old. He's gonna be 10
Oh,
months in like
wow.
2 days. So I'm getting like no sleep, but it's fun. Um, yeah. How do you now from that perspective? I have a few people in the community, not a lot, but a few people who have kids and families, and they're still at that sort of beginning stage of trying to like get their foothold. How do you negotiate for how do you like get time and how do you like keep your focus working at home, because that I feel like is there's a spectrum of people who probably could either do really well with that or have a really hard time with that. What have you found that's like really helped you stay productive, stay focused at home?
That's a great question, and I seem to be. I don't know. I've found a couple of other people that work the way I do, but my experience has been that I work a little differently, but it works for me. And I've always, I think, even when I was in school, I was in Los Angeles and I was working for this composer. Actually, then it was all these crazy hours. I'd have to stay up all night and do all this crazy stuff. And I think because of that, when I left LA, I was very 9 to 5 and Monday to Friday about everything. And I've realized over time, especially this past summer, I was doing this TV show by myself that was like 40 minutes of music a week. It was insane. And I would work like 6 days or 7 days a week. And I mean, it was literally like one Saturday, I realized I'd been hashing over the same scene for like an hour and just kept deleting it and trying to redo it. And the deadline was like Monday or something, and I was like, that's it. I turned everything off. I shut it down, and I took all the rest of Saturday off and all day Sunday, and I came back in Monday morning, and the ideas just flowed. So that was only this last summer, and I'd been doing it for 20 years. But for me, working very regimentedly and like 9 to 5, having nights off, gets me to replenish and physically and mentally. Plus, it gets me time with my family. I take lunch and having breakfast in the morning, and then having weekends off. That's how I'm the most efficient. I can work really fast if I have that time off. That being said, being in the house, even when I was in the like a spare bedroom in my old house before I built my studio, the door was always open, literally and physically. The door was always open because the girls were really young at the beginning, and I wanted them to be able to just come in and Daddy, look, I made a and I always made sure.
Get out! I'm recording.
Yeah, exactly. Don't you know the rules?
Yeah.
I always made sure to stop and like physically turn around and look at them, and I didn't want them to feel like they were being like, that's nice, honey.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll see you later.
I have
wanted
no
them to
time for
feel
your
like they
macaroni
were
pictures.
Welcome. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
I knew, and it like that. They're now they're 18, so they're not bringing macaroni pictures in here anymore.
Yeah.
They do bring other fun things, but yeah, it's about that balance again, and being able to mentally kind of divide the two and kind of turn it off. It's hard, but after a while, you kind of get used to it. You're like, okay, now I'm working, and it's 8 in the morning, and I've got to work, and you just go. And then at 5 o'clock or at 4 o'clock, by today's means, I finished this last cue like 3 minutes before I logged into the computer with you. It's like, all right, I got to be finished by 4. 3:57, I was finished. It's just, you just get used to it, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I found that creating a work schedule for myself over these past few months has been a huge help. Just to have that like,
Yeah.
not that it's completely inflexible, but have those like, hey, this is. I know that I've got that work time coming up, so I don't have to think about it now, which I feel like is
Yep.
a huge stress relief. That's awesome, though.
Yeah.
I'm the same way. I have like if my 4-year-old like specifically is like, "Will you play with me?" Then I have to be in a real tight spot. Like I have to really be in a tight spot to say no, because I want him to keep asking.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way. So cool. I have some weird questions for you to kind of as we come towards the end of the interview here. I've got three final questions. One of them is not so weird. The other two are kind of unusual. But
Cool.
Nothing really too out there. Number one is kind of a simple one. What has been one of your favorite purchases under $100 that you've made in the past few years for your music stuff, your career?
Trying to, I thought I had it around.
This is fun. This is anticipation right now. It's building. I'm like, what's he gonna pull out?
Oh, yeah, right. Nothing that excited, believe me. But it'd be cool if I could show it to you. But I think I must have put it. My violin. I think it was like $79. A $79 violin off of Amazon. I gotta tell you, it was like, well, I'm a drummer. I don't know anything about strings, but just being able to hold it and just kind of move the bow and see kind of what it feels like. It first of all completely blew me away, because I think I was working on Until Dawn, and I went to a live session to conduct the strings for the gig, and I'd been trying to, I think I was practicing cello at the time, but it was just like I was standing on the podium going, I don't know how you guys do it, because I just can't even just like getting an open string to bow just to sound good. It's like, they're like, oh yeah, we practiced that for 10 years.
Oh, that'll help.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But having that super inexpensive violin, either that or my first ukulele that I got, I think was like $89. Now I'm not going to talk about any plugins or virtual, effects or anything like that, because I'm all about the physical thing and everything I can do to make it as live and as real as possible. Because, everyone has to do things in the computer, but, everything I can do, especially for me as a performance kind of person, everything I can play on would be great.
Awesome.
Everything I can play on makes it great. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine just having the violin too. Obviously you can like study the stuff in books about like what certain instruments can and can't do, but when you have it in your hands, you get like a more visceral appreciation for like, hey, this interval, this quickly performed interval, is not realistic if I were to take this into a recording session or something like that. That's cool. I wasn't gonna expect a violin. I wasn't expecting a violin. That's a cool answer. Now this is kind of like a good segue then. A weirder question, number one of two. Let's say you had to start over today, and you had all the knowledge and experience that you have, but you don't have any relationships, you don't have any of the gear, any of the instruments, nothing. All you have is $500 and a laptop. How do you start over if you had to do it in those circumstances?
So
how would you use those $500 on the laptop?
Is there already music software on the laptop? So we're
sure.
set?
I'll give you a DAW.
Okay.
Sure. Let's say you've got
okay. Well, first thing I do is get a microphone. Oh, you can't. Sorry, get a mic right there. Microphone. Mm-hmm. I would probably get like an SM58 maybe, and some sort of little. Actually, Art makes this little like. It's like this big. It's a little tube mic pre. I think it's $139 or something like that. So I'd have my microphone and I'd have my little interface, and I'd buy some kind of headphones so I'd be able to listen to something. And then I'd probably, I don't know, I'd have to wait and see what else I would need it. That'd probably be about half the money, I would think. So I'd have like $250 left, and then, no travel. So
yeah.
Start making those local connections, and then figure out what else I need to get. Maybe someone can hire me for something that I can like buy that $79 violin for, that $89 ukulele. But microphone. A way to record, because whether it's breathing, which I recorded myself doing all these embarrassing like for Far Cry Primal, where my daughter was actually in the studio with me, and I'm rubbing bricks together and clanking these like clay pots that plants are in, doing all this weird stuff because I do a couple of cues every day, and she's just hanging out, like playing something on the iPad. And I'm like, okay, sweetie, I need you to go upstairs. She's like, oh, you have to do the breathing? I was like, yeah. Because I couldn't do it with her in the room because it's like 2.5 minutes of like, but the microphone was what made that all possible. Same thing as dragging the brick across my brick floor outside the studio door. The microphone, it's all about the microphone because everybody has all of these other things, all the sounds, all the libraries. Now everyone has their own style. They're putting it together different ways, and I can completely appreciate that. But bringing something original, truly original, even if it's a really cheap instrument, especially if you're doing scary stuff, cheap instruments are awesome because you can break them and mess them up, and it doesn't matter because you recorded it, right? when the neck broke on your guitar, you were recording, weren't you? Yeah, it's all about capturing that live kind of thing because that's what music is. Now, I mean, I'm not like techno dance, purely electronic music, but the kind of stuff we're talking about always has some element of humanity in it, and it's just really hard to recommend banging on a keyboard and making everything perfect to sound like a musician. Because see, if you have that microphone, you can also bring your friends over from music school or wherever and have them sing or play or do whatever. So that's my answer.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Then last question and weird question number 2.
Cool.
Let's say this is imagine a world where if you let's pretend for a moment that you have to train a protege. You have to train an apprentice, and you have 2 months with them to get them ready to produce an award-winning video game soundtrack. Now they, maybe they have some instrument chops. They know their way around a DAW. They're not
Sure.
completely green. But what would you focus on within those 2 months when you're teaching them in order to prepare them to go off on their own and create this award-winning beast of a soundtrack? Where would your focuses be?
So do I know what the game is that they're doing the soundtrack for, or is they're going to have to go do that on their own?
Let's say that's a good question. Let's say they're gonna have to do that on their own. They don't know.
Yeah, I think
they
that's
don't
a
know
more
what it's gonna be
yep.
until your 2 months are up, and then they get their
right. And
props.
Right.
And then you're out.
Well, again, this is like asking how do you break into the industry, where you're basically just holding a mirror up to me, and everything that I'm going to tell you is how I would normally approach a game anyway. But the game is king. The game is what determines everything. The game determines how much music there is, whether it maybe it doesn't need a lot of music because it's wall-to-wall gunfire all the time, or maybe it needs more interesting kinds of music because there's a lot of exploration. But also the game determines where the music comes in and where the music goes out. And I've always been a really big proponent of less is more in terms of like wallpaper music. I actually had to, well, I wouldn't say fight, but I took a very firm stance when I was on Tomb Raider, because previous to me coming on board, the audio director was the composer. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think being on salary, they were just like, we need music all the time, because it didn't really cost them. There was no, responsibility for asking for more music. And sure, more music is always a good thing, right? So you get this music playing constantly, and it's just your brain turns it off after a while, which is why with that Tomb Raider, I wanted a lot of space where there wasn't going to be any music, or very, very, very little music. So when it did come in, it actually meant something. And how the music is implemented is also just a really, really big deal. A lot of times games can't have the sophisticated kinds of implementation that, say, Uncharted or something like The Order or a Journey, having Austin on this game for 2 or 3 years and getting to do all these different variations of things. A lot of times It needs to be done quickly. There's not enough people to put it all in the game, and it's just kind of where it's going to start and where it's going to stop and where the stingers are going to be. But if you have any sort of control over a couple of layers of interactive music, that can really sell the experience of the game. Having the music sort of moving and changing with you as you're moving forward in a level really helps the idea of, hey, I'm having fun. I'm not listening to the same piece of music, just playing over and over and over and over and over. So I think implementation is also really important. We would probably spend like a week in Wise just learning, but honestly, that's one of those things. If I knew I was going to have 2 months with somebody before they showed up, I'd say, you need to learn Wise before you get here. Because that's just that's something that wasn't around when I started, but if I was starting now, that's one of the first things I would do. You can download it for free. The courses are for free. You can get a certification. And that's going to be your best in to a job is, oh, well, hey, I write music. Well, we don't need music. Oh, we need someone to implement sound effects. Oh, I can use Wise too. And I know how to record sound effects. And I can do audio editing. And then, oh, wait, I put a couple of pieces of music that I wrote in there too. I mean, I know you didn't need them. But, oh, yeah, no, they're really cool. It's all about being multi-talented and multifaceted and appealing to game developers' sense of wanting to make their project better. So, yeah, the music is what determines. The game is what determines like the music itself, the instruments that you use. Don't ever assume anything. I think with music, don't ever assume that it's going to be an orchestra, or it's going to be a standard orchestra, or it's going to be all synths, or it's going to be, walk through with the developer and get a feel for what they need and what they think they want and they think maybe they don't want. And I think the more you can push those boundaries and kind of, I feel like my job as a composer is to kind of do all these really out of left field seeming kinds of suggestions for where music should start and stop, or what kind of music, or the instruments that we should use. And 99% of the time, the developer just goes, okay, that's great. Yeah, let's try it, which is my favorite answer. Let's see how it sounds in the game. That's my favorite answer. That's even better than yes, I love it, because yes, I love it is a knee-jerk reaction to listening to it. Let's see how it sounds in the game is I think this is super cool, but let's put it in the game and see, because that's how ultimately it's going to play out, right? I mean, the soundtrack lives on beyond the game, but it's made to be in the game. It's made to be experienced with the game. So having that sort of a idea of pushing boundaries, I always want the developer to get to a point where they're like, maybe we don't want to do like that. But they never have. They've never done it. It's like anyone from the crazy orchestras for The Order to all the weird percussion in Tomb Raider, all the crazy orchestra stuff, the effects and everything in Dead Space. I've done so many different things. Far Cry Primal, recording a bucket of dirt and like trees. I literally set up all these plants and rocks and I mic'd it like a drum set and then went over and recorded everything. And I thought, they're never going to like this. This is going to be ridiculous. And they loved it. It's like the more out there you can get, what seems out there to us as musicians just sounds original to people outside of the world of music. So be as original as you can. I mean, there's everything okay?
Yeah, it's Can't from downstairs.
Yeah.
He's had a tough week.
Yeah, haven't we all? The more original you can be, the better. And it's not a matter of being true to yourself. It's a matter of being true to the game and doing what the game kind of tells you that it needs. And that's sort of the philosophical approach for me, at least.
Cool. Well, I think as far as those last three questions, you gave some really thoughtful and really well-rounded answers that didn't dive too deep in any one direction. You know what I mean? Because you can get super specific, but I think that those are very utilitarian, very 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 well-rounded ways to think about all those different scenarios, like priorities and low budget and all that kind of stuff. So I think that'll be really helpful to especially people who are really at that beginning stage, just getting started out. I wanted to be respectful of your time, Jason, and say again, thank you so much for. Time flies.
I know.
So I say thank you so much for spending about an hour here with me to answer some questions. The VGM Academy community is very grateful to you, and I'm sure they're going to love hearing all that you've had to say tonight. Is there anything that you're working on right now that you'd like to mention or point people in the direction of that you're excited that you're working on right now? That you can talk about.
Video games.
That's always a thing.
You know, that's the biggest problem with video games is they're all so secretive. It's to the point now where when I can talk about a game, it feels wrong. Like I'm waiting for an assassin to, shoot me out of a tree with an arrow or something. No, I've got there's 3 or 4 things currently in production, but I can say, so Until Dawn had Man of Medan, which was kind of its spiritual successor. That came out earlier this summer, and I'm working on sort of, it's not a sequel, but the next step in that same anthology of games called Little Hope. Mm-hmm. I know I can say that because Supermassive put it on my IMDb page.
Great.
I know.
There's an assassin behind you. Watch out.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, speaking of the violin, and I've got this really cheap. I mean, it was like a couple $100. This hurdy-gurdy that a professional hurdy-gurdy is like $3,000, and you have to wait 1.5 years for them to make them. And I bought a really, really inexpensive one, but it's to do these scary, sort of creepy kinds of things, and it's perfect. Awesome. Using that one microphone and all those cheap instruments, man.
That's the way to do it. It's awesome. Well, thanks again, and I'm going to go ahead and push the end on the recording button, and I can't wait to share this with everyone, thanks. We're just really grateful, and I can't wait to the next time we have a chance to connect.
It's totally my pleasure. Thanks.